Welcome, everybody, to Learning Happy Hour. My name is Patrick Brantley. I'm a senior technical trainer for Palo Alto Networks. And with me this week is Ronen, and I will let him do the introduction for himself. Go ahead, Ronen.
Thanks, Patrick. So yes, my name is Ronen. I'm from Australia. I'm technical trainer JPAC for Palo Alto Networks. And we've got some exciting stuff to cover in this session. Patrick, do you want to introduce what everyone's going to talk about, or do you want me to? Yeah, go for it.
We're going to talk about credential theft and you. Actually, we're going to talk about, we'll talk about credential theft, but it'll be credential theft detection using the URL filtering engine of the Palo Alto Networks Firewall. So let's begin. What's our goal when we're trying to use the credential theft protection?
Well, I guess you should start with the idea of phishing and credential theft and what the scary stuff is and what people need to avoid, right? So Why is credential, well, firstly, what is credential theft and why is it bad? So we all agree that if someone has your username and password, that's a bad thing. I don't think anyone needs to discuss that or and about it, right? Okay, so people having our credentials, bad. Credentials being username.
Also, obviously the goal of a attacker, it's a lot easier if we give them the keys. So it 100% a highly valuable way of attacking. So
yeah, there's a good analogy for that. It's the story about the rabbit or the hare and the tortoise with the race. Right. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. If you're trying to compromise a particular organization or a site, instead of having to work through the whole lengthy, slow process of, okay, let's do some reconnaissance. Let's find out what vulnerabilities they have. Let's find out what the weak links are and how I'm going to attack this and pivot and do all that crazy work. How about I just get some admin credentials and I'm there? It's way better. Yeah. So it's a very serious component of our security footprint, if you want to call it that. Actually, no, security stance, we'll call it that, which is, I want to say, not overlooked, but it's often not given as much attention as it probably should be.
Right.
Yeah. So now we know, we kind of get the idea. We don't want people to have access to our usernames and passwords. So how do they actually get those credentials? And there's a couple of different ways. A common one that people have been discussing for quite a while is the concept of phishing or spear phishing, right? Where someone could send you a malicious email with the intention of having you click on something, whether it be downloading malware, separate story, and doing keyloggers and things like that, or whether it be something like proposing to them a website where, in order to access your own company resources, you have to authenticate. So please put your username and password, and then they harvest that. So that's one side.
Yeah, actually, just a little story about that. This is almost a decade ago now. I was talking to a security expert, and he was describing to me, and this is kind of before phishing became the buzzword it is, but he was describing to me how I believe it was a bank that was compromised, and the way they did it was they had a particular person they wanted to get to, but what they did was they went to his personal assistant who had put on Facebook all the details about her job and where she worked, and they actually went and found her yearbook of her graduating class, because that was on Facebook, stole the identity of people in her yearbook, her graduating class that were not on Facebook, sent her some friend requests, and then one day sent her a message in Facebook saying, you should click on this link to see the pictures. We all, a bunch of us got together. It was like a mini reunion. She clicked, no pictures, but they were able to breach through her and get to their target. So even back when they used Facebook as a phishing. When we think about, emails, we think about links being sent, and this was just pretty elaborate, but they tricked her and they achieved their goals. So,
well, there's a will, there's a way, right? And that's a good story. It's a classic social engineering piece, and it is definitely a component, a reconnaissance and staged approach. It really depends on the pot of gold that an adversary is after. If you make it juicy enough, why not? We'll invest. Yeah. So it's surprisingly common. Yeah. I've had a few similar situations in more recent years with phone calls. So voice type stuff too, which is getting scarier and scarier. Next, they rock up to your office and they're like, yes, I've come to fix the air conditioning. And you're like, who are you again? It happens for sure. But
So.
Yeah, I know, right? It sounds unrealistic, but it's happened to me a couple of times. So not that my credentials have been stolen, the attempts. Right. Let me save some face there. Hang on.
Yeah. But you're a security expert, right?
Yeah. What are you talking about? You don't make mistakes, Ronen. So a lot of what we just discussed there as well relies on or relates to obviously web browsing. You're browsing to Facebook, you're browsing to the link that it might have been sent to you, and you click on it and you visit there, and then it's asking you for something and you enter details or some malware is downloaded. Well, on our firewalls, obviously we have URL protection. So it's a profile that we have, and it has quite a few features. Obviously, the main one that everyone thinks about is, you can block people going to social media, you can block people going to gambling sites, you can do this other stuff. But something that was introduced somewhat recently, not terribly new, but somewhat recently, was the idea of, while we're at it, also looking for these credential theft style pages. Now, that is brand new. We have some machine learning magic that I'll show you a little bit about in a demo in a sec. But also, for a while, we've had the ability to look for when people have been adding in or entering their credentials to third-party sites. And we've got some nice smarts that we can do around that. So I want to show a kind of walkthrough of what that would look like. We've got a lovely, it's an EDU 214 class, official Palo Alto course where we do walk through that process. So you'll actually see it. But I want to showcase a bit out of that course, if that's all right, if you're cool with that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into it. And I'll share my screen using Zoom. So this is just taken out of our lab environment, but this is a Palo Alto firewall. This one's running 10.1, but this feature has been around for a little bit. The machine learning stuff I've mentioned is in 10.0. The credential theft has been a little bit longer. So you probably have seen this, or if you haven't, check. And if you're a Palo Alto customer or have a Palo Alto firewall, have a login and take a look at the options. But for us right now, what I want to concentrate is this profile. So I've made a learning happy hour URL filtering profile. And right now, how people tend to use this tool is just for URL filtering. So we have this site access section over here. And then for our different categories, like, gambling, hacking sites, computer internet links, that kind of stuff, we say, I want to allow people access to the site or not. So then you can change these to be, I want to block traffic, or there's a few other options, continue, override, etc. So we have some granular control there, great visibility. But there's another column. And this column is not, as I was saying, not used as much as I'd like to see it being used, which is this user credential submission. And what that states is, for any of these categories, for example, like a dating site. Yeah. If you went to a dating site right now, if we detected that you were entering your credentials, then we would allow that through. And maybe you don't want to do that. So before we talk about what your credentials are, we need to tell this profile how to identify the user, because there's some granularity there too. It's actually all done on this tab, the user credential detection tab. And here, all we're saying is what is justified or flagged as credentials. Now, you could be really, really broad with it, and I'll show you some of these options here. And you can use, and by the way, a user ID is required to be enabled for this feature, but we can use what's called group mapping. Yeah. And that group mapping relates to the groups that we're tracking with user ID. So for example, sales, people who are in the sales group, people who are in the marketing group, people who are IT admins, those kind of groups. And all that returns to us is a list of usernames, meaning that if you went to a dating site, my username, if you will, at Palo Alto Networks is my full name. So R Meshel, right? That's at Palo Alto Networks. So that's my username. Right. Now, if I used group mappings, then I could look for anyone's username who is in, and then the groups that we choose. I'll show you what that actually looks like. I haven't got any groups configured, but it's purely a process of selecting which group mappings we want. If you select any, then every group that we're tracking on our firewall, every user that's contained with it might be 1,000 different usernames. That's what I care about. Notice I haven't said anything about the password. It's just the username. Yeah. So if I were to enable this with any, we are then saying, hey, if I see anyone type in a username of R Meshel or P Brannerly, for example, then we will flag that as we have detected user credentials. Now, the question is, what do we do with it? And that's what's under here under categories. And it's just a matter of changing these actions. So the example I was giving you is dating sites, right? Where is it?
Right.
Alphabet. Let's go. So here for dating, I could say block. I'm not blocking people accessing dating sites. I'm blocking people from using usernames like Ronen Meshel or P. Branley on dating sites. Anywhere else is okay, right? So we can get granular if we want. But often a choice operation here is to say, I want to set all of them to be block. So it doesn't matter what kind of site it is. If I detect one of those usernames, kill it. Now, the problem with doing that is that maybe, Patrick, you want to sign up to a dating site and you want to use my name because it's a cool name. I don't know, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Who knows? And the problem is it won't let you do that with the current setup we have, because what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, no, that's a username in our organization. Therefore, you can't do it. So we can change it up. Here, instead of user credential detection using just the broad group mapping, we could say, I want to use the use IP user mapping option. And what is that, right? That is more granular in that the firewall knows if traffic is coming from my IP address, it's associated with me, Ronen Meshel. If it's coming from your IP address, it's associated with you, P. Branley.
Right.
So then if I were to try and use your name, it would not detect. But because I am me and I'm coming from my IP address, if I try to use my own username, it'll trigger and then take the action that we specify. Making sense so far?
Yeah, that's very cool, actually. Yeah, go ahead. I was actually thinking of some things, but we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, no worries. So we're getting more and more granular. There is another level of granularity to this, which is using domain credential filters, which uses blooms and all this other wonderful stuff, which then says, okay, I don't mind if Ronen uses Ronen Meshel. What I care about is if he's using the same username and password as we have for him logging into the domain. So that's the next level of complexity. We're going to keep it at this simple one for our demo, which is just use IP user mapping, meaning that for me, if I went to a dating site, logged into this machine, I could use your name and it would not trigger. I would not take the action of block in this case.
Yeah.
But if I use my own name, it will. So let's actually commit this. And while that's committing, I'll just have a quick look at some of the logs to make sure that user ID is working, and we'll see who the logged in user is in this particular lab environment. So I'll close that.
So one of the things about this is just thinking, when you do want to allow, right, let's say blocking all categories, right?
Right.
You allow on certain things, then you can customize category that some specific instances instead of just kind of universally blocking or universally allowing the category, right?
Yeah. So you're cutting out a bit there, but I think I got your question. So if we take a look at that URL filter again, right, we have the option of setting a custom URL category, which then says, for these particular sites, I don't want to do the credential theft business or the credential submission detection, if you want to call it that business. So I've got a custom one here, block per policy. I could make my own URL category list, which is purely based on Office 365 or other sites that I know my users are actually going to, and they need to. Maybe we have SSO that's cloud-based. They need to go and log in with their actual credentials up in the cloud. Does that make sense? So you can add those categories in.
Yeah.
Cool. So hang on a moment. All right. So we can go to the monitor tab now, and we can take a look at our traffic logs and just confirm, is it actually transmitting or not? And transmitting is our username. So over here, I can see, let's browse to a site, not that one. I'll show you that one in a second. Let's go to have I been owned? I'm going to talk to you about this site in a second, but I'll just browse to that site real quick. Hopefully that works. Should. Cool. And I'll talk to you about what this site is in a moment. But what I'm interested in is once that loads, okay, I'll just close it. We'll take a look at some of these logs here. And hopefully we'll see log entries. You can see some already populating here. So I'm confident it's working, but we'll just double check. We should get a new log entry. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Cool. So we're seeing that the username in this point is actually Sydney/DBill. That is the logged in user in this lab environment. So I have a website here, which is totally legitimate. Have a look. It's auth with not a phishing site.lab. It's not nothing dodgy, nothing scary here. So we're gonna enter
nothing to see here. Just move along.
Just move along, right? And we're gonna select your username. We'll go P Branley, double L, and I'll put a password in. What's your password, Pat? UGHH. All right, and then da. So I just typed in.
But I put an @ symbol in it. So password with an @ symbol. Nobody knows. Nobody can break that. So.
With an @ symbol. There we go. Right, long password, very secure. Now the location here is just this particular site has an intranet site, and this looks like what they would typically select, Sydney HQ or something else. It doesn't really matter. We'll leave it Sydney HQ. When I hit submit, well, my user is dbill, not P Branley, so it should not trigger. Let's see what happens. Oh, and it did not trigger. So unfortunately, you've been owned, right? High tech, right? How embarrassing. Don't tell anyone, but it's been harvested. Did you enter them? Why did you type those credentials in a random site that you didn't trust, really? And what I want to showcase, though, is look up here in the URL and the URI. We've got owned.html ? Then we have the username equals P Branley and password equals. This is being recorded, right? Sorry, Patrick. Everyone's going to know your password now. 2765 with an hash symbol. Oh, man. UK keyboard. It's meant to be an @ symbol. Right. Oh, no. hash 40. Sorry, percentage 40. That is @. Cool. And location equals Sydney HQ. Beautifully translated.
Everybody don't go to my Netflix now because then I have to share. Right.
But the point is it didn't trigger. So let's go back. Right. And because the firewall assumes that we are dbill, let's try dbill as a user.
Yep.
And I'll put a password in. Doesn't matter what the password is. Fire in the hole. Hey.
Right, we're doing just the IP.
Right. And this is our firewall
username IP. Right.
Yes. Yeah. By username, by IP to user mapping. Correct. Yeah. So now we've got this user. Yeah. Credential phishing detected, bad happens, and then we're blocking it. This is the URL we went to. Unfortunately, the nature of this attack means that it's still available here, right? But at least the bad guys never got that. Yeah, that's still really bad, but hey, we blocked it. Success. The other cool thing about this that I'll highlight is you'll notice I didn't actually put Sydney /dbill. I could have put domain / and then I think I spelt it wrong, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's clever enough to know when you have that particular, format. If I put in dbill 2, right? So this is a different username. We get through because it doesn't match. So it's clever enough to know what the domain part is and work it out from there. So that already protects us way more than just standard URL filtering. There's another level on top of this as well that's worthy of mentioning, which is in the profile itself, we have 2 mechanisms to protect beyond just that. One is blocking the categories themselves. So there is a category, if I search for phishing, right? Phishing should come up. Yeah, there is a category for these already. So if it's a public site that is courtesy of our PanDB URL category engine is flagged as bad. Obviously, we don't want to just alert. I want to block those sites. So that's one level of protection there. Second level of protection with user credential submission, which uses these options to dictate who's actually, trying to type in credentials. And again, it's not for here, we're just caring about the username. So this one just cares about username. This one just cares about username if it maps to the person who's doing it. And then, this one. And then this one can utilize, I don't mind if you use R Meshel or P Branley at some website, as long as it's not the same password username combination. So that's the most hardcore and most specific, which is fantastic. So that's another way.
But it's very common, right? We, tend to use the same, like my first initial last name tends to be in a lot of places. So
which is fair.
It is good to have the capability that it doesn't just flag everywhere, unless we just want to lock everybody down, I suppose. But,
having the options is always key. And I should also mention, you don't have to block it. You can also set it to alert. So then probably not for this category, we'd be blocking it, but for other categories of our choice, you can just have it log rather than block. We get more details. I think you can't actually configure this one away. Let me. Right. So we could alert. So log it. Allow lets it through, doesn't log. So we want to alert for those.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. One thing that I kind of actually learned the hard way when I first started using the firewall years ago, and that was that I had everything set to all the ones that I wanted to allow. I set to allow, and then I went to go check my logs, and I went, "Hey, wait a minute! Yeah, it's an alert. Logs. Allow doesn't."
Yes,
I mean traffic log, yes, but URL filtering log. So
you want to see it. You want that visibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. And URL filtering will give you better visibility specifically for URLs that you're looking for. So
bingo.
Anyway, yeah.
So we've got
so
we've got this URL engine piece, which just denies site access. Layer of protection number one. Next, we have the user credential submission piece. Then we also have this new in version 10, this inline machine learning piece too. So some big data analysis.
Exciting.
It is. It's pretty cool. And it's way more complicated than my poor intellect can comprehend. But in a nutshell, let's dumb it down. The concept is that after much big data machine learning analysis being done in the cloud with all the different resources that we have at our behest, we have boiled it down to these models. So we have a model for what a phishing site typically looks like. Now, my shonky version here that I created, this page here, does not adequately get classified because it's like, no, this is too dumb to be a real credential phishing site. This is so poorly made, Ronen. This is clearly not a real credential phishing site. So it won't flag it. It won't catch it. Currently, it's set to allow over here. But just like we saw before, I could block that. If I commit this, this engine is not going to pick up my poor attempt because it's really not good enough. But if your customers or users were browsing to sites that were phishing, the model that we download and implement on the firewall is clever enough to be able to look at the kind of, I don't want to say behavior, it's not the right term, but the components that would typically make up a phishing site and go, nah, I don't like that. It's pretty schmick. So it's not that we're doing the machine learning on the firewall. It's all this big data, heavy, like hardcore CPU churning through data to give us this nice lightweight model, which is like, that's a phishing site. I don't need to rely on it being in this category over here of phishing, right? It doesn't have to be here. I can dynamically, did I spell it wrong? I did. I can dynamically, I can dynamically associate it with a bad phishing site without having to query or do anything. It's pretty cool. New in version 10. So yeah. So that's another layer of protection. Now, when we talk about spear phishing and all that kind of stuff, we're assuming that someone is trying to target you, your organization. There is another problem and another kind of use case where this mechanism helps us. And that's for when you go to certain sites like, for example, LinkedIn.com. Who here, it's just me and Patrick, but anyone who watches this, right? Well, LinkedIn. Raise your hands. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So we have a policy that's blocking it. But yeah, you use your email address, your work email address, don't you?
Yep.
And the problem is, it's not so much we're worried about people stealing, well, we are, but people stealing your password directly from the source. What if, hear me out, we have users in our environment, they sign up to LinkedIn and they choose to, for some reason, use the same password on LinkedIn, which happens to be the same username because we're using an email address, as they use for their corporate laptops and access to all that stuff.
Nobody would do that.
No, it doesn't happen, right? That's called password reuse. If we password reuse statistics. Oh, dangerous Google. Oh, this looks like a good Instagram, like a little diagram.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 52%. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't happen. Right. I don't know. Just quick Google search.
Well, I mean, I've never done it. I mean,
Good. Yeah, no, neither. Especially not for my banking and my Facebook, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you use the same username and password there, and we're allowing that through, what if LinkedIn were to be compromised? Because they're storing your username and password, aren't they?
Sure.
That would never happen, right? So
never.
I want to introduce you to another site called Have I Been Owned? I don't know who runs it. HaveIBeenOwned.com. And it's not pwned, it's owned. But anyway, it's a really cool site. What you can do is you can type in an email address here, and then it will tell you if that email address as a username has been detected or seen in a compromise that's kind of been made public. So for example, if I put in my I got to spell my own name right. My Palo Alto Networks email address. It has a look. Hey, good news. No ownage found. Oh, great. And then some tips about security. Doesn't matter, but beautiful. I'm good. I'm not going to put yours in, Patrick, because I haven't checked it yet. So we'll keep you out of the spotlight. But I want to showcase a couple that I had seeded out before. This is an email address that I've used for LinkedIn, for example. And unfortunately, you'll see it's a different story for this one. And if we scroll down, you'll see breaches you were owned in. And the one that concerns me most, there's a couple. There's like a spam bot and whatnot. It's this one, LinkedIn, May 2016, blah, 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 blah. Passwords were stored, SHA-1 hashes without salt. So it's already bad. What was compromised? They got your email address, which is your username often. They got your password. That's your credentials. Okay. So if you use password reuse, well, bad news. Even though no one's compromised your machine, even though you've been happily working away at work, totally protected, full defense in depth stack. You've got Cortex XDR protecting your endpoint. You've got Strata firewalls on the perimeter, and you're doing all this wonderful SASE and SaaS stuff and everything. But at home, you on your kid's iPad, you log into LinkedIn with your username being the same as you have at work and the password being the same as you have at work.
Yeah, same as work. Yeah.
Not good. So you're kind of hosed.
Kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So what can we do to protect against that? It gets a bit more difficult, right? So the good news is we can do something, and that something is in the realm of this user credential detection, because then when someone logs into LinkedIn at the office, we can see that. If someone tries to set a new password while they're at the office and it's the same username is okay, same password, then we can use this other option to say, how about no, right? and at the very least, it's a reminder. We can have response pages to tell them that. We'll get logs as well. Like, for example, when I triggered that credential theft over there, we should get a threat log. Let's have a look to showcase that that's happened. Should be one or two in there. Let's see. Spinning wheel, spinning wheel, spinning wheel. Let's see. But there we go, right? So D-Bill tried to, spyware.
Right.
Malicious domains EDL. Oh no, we're being blocked by something else now, are we? No matter. It's been sinkhole. No, nothing. That's a different one. We'll check URL filtering. And we should start to see, I'll find it later. Not important for now. But the point is that we'll be generating logs, and then we can actually take action on those things that we see. So if you see a user use the same credentials in their office, even though they signed up at home, even though they use it every day at home, when they use it in the office, we'll get that little blip on the radar. We can choose to take action. And by the way, if you wanted to, you could integrate with something like XOR and do all these other wonderful playbooks that automate that too. So there's a couple of components there. Yeah, please.
Just to point out though, we covered sinkholing a little while back, but you look at the fact that we were looking at things inside URL filtering. And there's several options and several ways to go about it. But then you also saw the sinkholing, which takes advantage of the domain and the malicious domain. So you actually have kind of two ways to protect yourself when we're talking about URLs. With domains, it's a DNS query, but it's a DNS query for the URL, and it's looking at the domain. Yeah, so we're talking about URL filtering. It's looking at the actual URLs within their categories. And so all of that is just kind of illustrates that our security posture, if you will, can be very a wide range of
it's a good point.
Tactics or or possibilities.
Well, for example, so you just mentioned there, we've got the spyware profile does DNS sinkholing. So we've got, let's stop the DNS request in the first place, or sinkhole it when it's a malicious domain, or a phishing domain or malicious, doesn't really matter. We can do that. We have the URL filtering engine. I'll call it the vanilla one, right? Where we're just blocking the site access itself. We've got URL credential theft protection. We've got the inline machine learning piece. I want to add another one to the fray. It's a 5 we're talking about so far. One of the vectors that people use, unlike the example that you gave earlier, which was someone stalked someone on Facebook and the social engineering stuff, a very common vector for phishing is email, right? So we can protect our inbound email using Wildfire. And Wildfire has the ability to go and fetch a URL. And if it detects that the URL is in fact a phishing site, we can protect it at that point too. So we can stop the email coming through in the first place as well. So you're right. Defense in depth is madness. And then another one, number 6, is endpoint, like I mentioned. Cortex XDR, for example, has the ability to not allow access to those domains. So we're getting a bit fleshed out. There's a lot that way and that way. Yeah.
Well, just, a lot of tools in the toolbox is what we're saying here. So
all of which give you visibility as well. So yeah.
Right.
Well, that's basically what I wanted to demo.
Okay.
Anything else you wanted to discuss on that topic? Check out Have I Been Owned? It's pretty cool. I'll show you another one. Adobe at my domain. And as well, right?
Yeah.
And this time, have a look what they lost. Email addresses, password hints, passwords, and usernames. Fantastic. They were encrypted passwords at least though, but the password hints were in plain text, which again, you should be when you're signing up to these sites, right? Be very careful. Also, often people put like, what was the name? The story you told me brought this to mind, but what was your maiden name? Check the yearbook, right? That'll have the maiden name in it. Or who was your first love? Check the yearbook, right? It might be there.
Yeah, exactly.
You can harvest all this info. That's really cool. Yeah, good example.
Yeah. So, and the thing is to note too, is that, you might have a very, a good password, but you're trusting others, Adobe, LinkedIn, to protect those, and they don't always. So
they try.
It's not even what you did. It's what Adobe did. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's scary. Like, who can you trust? So I guess the moral of the story is don't use your passwords, especially your work passwords, for anything else. We can protect it to some extent, but also try and have unique passwords for every site. So although my LinkedIn password was compromised, as was my Adobe password, they weren't the same password. So if someone were to try and in fact, there were different usernames as well. If someone were to try and take those credentials and use them, or I know Ronen is also on Facebook and try and sign in with my Facebook, it's not going to work. Both the username and password are different. But that kind of isolation, that segmentation between my usernames and passwords is fantastic. That's kind of where the benefit of like things like LastPass, or can't remember any of the other top of my mind, but the password safe banks.
Yeah, your password vault, if you will. Yeah.
It's a good use case for them. Generate a new password for those. Even browsers now, like Firefox, has the ability to generate a new password and remember it. There are security concerns with that, aside from what we're talking about. But I think that if you're someone who is going to use or reuse passwords, having a solution like that far outweighs, and ultimately using different passwords for everything, far outweighs the concerns of, well, Firefox is remembering my passwords. Yeah, but at least your password's not the same for everything you use.
Yeah. My kids get real tired of me generating passwords and then saying, what is the Netflix password? I'm like, well,
let me print it for you.
Let me print it for you because you're not going to remember it. So, but like I said, they kind of complain, and I'm like, hey, guess what? We're protected. We're not just handing things out. So too bad, kids. Been born to a person who works in cybersecurity. Sorry about that.
Tough luck. That's luck of the draw. Yeah, I'll be setting up a proxy at home to quota them for internet. That's my next plan.
There you go. Yeah.
Fun. Cool. All right. Well, that's basically all I wanted to cover. Anything else you want to touch on?
I think we're good. So that really concludes what we want to talk about today. But stay tuned for more content. We will be delivering a lot more in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned. But anyway, for me, thanks everyone. Thanks for viewing, and your comments are welcome. So please let us know what you think or give us any questions. Happy to answer them.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Patrick.
Yep. Thank you. Stay safe.
Cheers. Mate. Yeah.